My name is Mike Jenne. Today is October 22nd, 2024, and I'm in Cleveland, Tennessee to interview Roger Jenne, who also happens to be my father. This interview is taking place as part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Good afternoon. I'm going to refer to you simply as Dad, as opposed to Roger or Mr. Jenne. So Dad, I'm glad you're here today participating in this interview, and it's certainly an honor for me to be here with you to participate with you. A lot of lawyers and judges know you, but some do not. So let's start the interview by you telling us your name, your date of birth, and your place of birth.
Sure. Well, first let me say that I'm honored to be a part of the Legal History Project for the Tennessee Bar Foundation. It really is quite an honor for me to be included in this project. But my full name is Roger Earl Jenne. I was born February 7th of 1942 in Earlville, New York, in the upstairs of my grandmother's house on a real cold, wintry night. Doctors couldn't get there, so the neighbors delivered me, but I don't remember much about that event.
So where is Earlville, New York?
To orient anyone watching this, Earlville, New York is 5 miles south from Hamilton, New York, which is the home place of Colgate University, and 13 miles north of Norwich, New York, which is where Norwich Pharmaceuticals originated. A little west of there, probably 45 miles, is Ithaca, where Cornell and Ithaca College. So it's a rural central area. And at that time, the time I grew up there, the population was about 600. I went back there a few years ago, and the population is about 500 now. But it was a one red light community.
So what type of industry did they have there at that time when you were born?
It was agricultural. There was no industry there. The people that did not work in agriculture worked outside of the area. It was about an hour drive up to Syracuse. They worked in Norwich. About the only real industry, I would say, was they had cattle auctions there. And again, this was in the 1940s, the time that I lived there. I think I left there in 1952 to move farther upstate New York. But they had a lot of cattle auctions, and that's about all they did in Earlville.
So that would have put you at about 10 years of age when you moved somewhere else?
I was actually 11 when we moved from Earlville to Herkimer, New York, which is up in central New York. To orient you on that, Herkimer is 12 miles east of Utica. It's right on the New York State Thruway and the Erie Canal that ran, of course, tied Lake Erie over to the Hudson River. That town, when I lived there, was about 9,000 in population, and it was, for me, it was a large metropolitan area. But of course, I wasn't a city boy. I was a farm boy when I moved there, and that was my existence in Herkimer.
What, if anything, is Herkimer known for?
Well, Herkimer at that time had a lot of industry, furniture manufacturing. They made desks there. Probably the famous thing is called the Herkimer Diamond. When they put the New York State Thruway through that area, they struck a real pure grain of quartz, and they first thought it was in fact diamonds. But it turned out to be just a really high grade of quartz that's still used in the jewelry manufacturing industry. And I'll go back there and visit occasionally, and there's an area where you can go and actually go mining for this quartz or these Herkimer diamonds. And they're quite attractive. I think when I was up there, I bought you back one some time ago.
Do you know how Herkimer got its name?
Yes, General Herkimer was a great Revolutionary War general. He was from upstate New York, and he fought at the Battle of Oriskany, was where he got his fame. And there's a statue in the park of him with his legs shot up, directing the combat from a saddle. And the whole county is called Herkimer County, but it's a large county in central New York. For another orientation, it was about 30 miles from Cooperstown. A lot of people know Cooperstown. But it was a great place when I grew up. Ilion, New York was just across the canal. Mohawk, New York was just across the canal, because Mohawk is where Mohawk carpet started. And Ilion, New York was where Remington Industries was located, and back in those days they actually made typewriters there, as well as firearms and other munitions. I read probably within the last 6 months where the Remington factory is completely closed down in Alien. And last time I was in the area, I visited Utica, New York, which is only 12 miles away. And it was sad because of the economic depression. A lot of the industry had just vacated these huge manufacturing facilities and it moved south, primarily for taxation purposes and labor cost.
So I'm going to ask you some questions about your family. Let's start off by you describing for us your paternal grandparents.
Well, my grandfather was named Hartley Earl Jenne. He was a farmer. My grandmother was a farm wife, led a simple life. I remember him when I was about 4 or 5 years old. He had a big handlebar mustache, and he died early in my lifetime. I spent a lot of time with my grandmother growing up. I walked from our house, which is 4 or 5 blocks, to her house, rode bicycles back and forth, and really had a good close family relationship. My dad's brother also lived in the area. He was another dairy farmer. My dad was a mechanic and did some farm work also until he bought the big dairy farm up in Herkimer. My grandmother, she was a fine woman, great cook, took good care of us, and she passed away, I think in 1970, because Matt, your brother, was just 6 months old when we went up there for that visit.
Well, what about your maternal grandparents?
I never knew my maternal grandfather. His name was John Sanford Weaver, and they were from up in Union County, Tennessee. My grandmother was Elizabeth Weaver, or Lizzie Weaver that they called her, and she was about 4 foot nothing. She was a little bitty lady, but I understand that my maternal grandfather had some height to him, and I guess that's where I got my height. And my maternal grandmother was quite elderly, so I never got very close to her. And of course, we lived in New York, and at best we got to come down here once a year, once every other year, so my mother could visit her sisters and brothers and other relatives, and I got to know my aunts and uncles and cousins at that time, but never really close to my maternal grandmother.
Well, you touched on your father. Tell us a little bit about your father, where he was born, and what he did for a living, and activities and businesses and things of that nature.
Sure. Well, both my parents at that time, it was the Great Depression. They grew up in the Great Depression. And I remember hearing tales of my father leaving the home farm when he was 14 years of age. He was born in that same area, central New York, a little community called South Otselic. And, there was just absolutely no work. My mother, on the other hand, was born in Lewiston, Tennessee, a small community in Union County that's no longer there. Well, my father joined the CCCs during this Depression era because there was just no work, and that was, of course, one of Roosevelt's programs to provide employment to young men, primarily 18 to 21 years of age. But his troop, I guess we'd call it, from central New York got dispatched to Union County, Tennessee to work on the Norris Dam project. They were clearing land, doing preparatory work, and the barracks where he happened to be stationed was in Lewiston, Tennessee. So that's where my mom and dad met, and I guess my dad was down here about a year and a half or so, maybe a little bit longer. They married. My dad went back to central New York with his company, as he's required to do, and my mother took a train from Knoxville to central New York. It was the first time she'd ever been out of Union County. She was 16 years of age. And Lewiston, a lot of people have never heard of Lewiston. It's now about 90 feet underwater, where Norris Dam came in and to manage the Clinch and the Powell River, because that area, because Tennessee Valley continued to flood. Of course, the TVA took over my maternal grandparents' farm, and they dispersed. So they had to leave that area because most of the farm was flooded. I've been up there to see a little bit of it. You can still see a cellar and a bank wall where they stored their milk and water, butter, that kind of stuff. But most of the family dispersed East Tennessee, and that's why we kind of had a connection here, and we come down to visit every year, every couple of years, and visit aunts, uncles, cousins, and that type of thing. But the Depression, I'm glad I wasn't in it. It was a pretty difficult time, but they survived, and they provided a good family for us.
So what was your father's full name?
His full name?
Yes.
Elwyn Merton Jenne.
And what about your mother?
It was Atha Josephine Weaver Jenne.
Do you recall what the population of Lewiston was at the time that TVA came in and acquired this property?
I don't remember reading about that. It was just a small mountain community. There was nothing there except farms. Of course, there's no industry, no manufacturing, but people, I remember hearing my mother talk a story. She always hated tobacco, and she had to work in the tobacco fields, taking bugs off of tobacco, and that's why she hated tobacco all of her life. My grandfather was a farmer, and he also was a casket maker in that area. I've gone back up to Union County with some of my cousins and found some of the old cemeteries where my grandparents are buried and other relatives, and found their headstones and put chalk on them to be able to get superimposed the names. But it's been some time since I've been up there.
Well, you told us when you were 11 that you moved to Herkimer. What was it like growing up in Herkimer, New York?
Well, I grew up on a dairy farm, something I wouldn't recommend to anybody, except we learned to take care of what we had. We learned to fix what got broken. We learned hard work paid off, and I learned that whatever I did in life wasn't going to be milking cows. But when in Earlville, the schooling there was really good school for a small community. And I fancied myself as a pretty good student, studied pretty hard, tried to stay ahead, and did right well. But when I moved to Herkimer, my mother took me downtown, which is 3 miles from where our farm was, to register for school. And I registered and went to school there about a week. And then they came and told my mother that I couldn't go to school down in the city. I had to go to a farm school. And as a result, I went to a farm school that was up the road from where our farm was, and this was a one-room schoolhouse, and this was in 1953. And when you in the South, when you tell people you were from New York, they immediately think New York City, Manhattan, big-time guy. I was going to a one-room schoolhouse in Herkimer, New York, but I was valedictorian in my 7th and 8th grade because I was only the 7th grader and the only 8th grader. There were 12 kids in the whole school, and I even progressed to the point where I was janitor of the school. And then I got paid $75 a year for building a fire in a big pot-belly stove. That's the only way it heated the schoolhouse. And in the wintertime, I'd have to, we'd always milk cows starting about 4:30 in the morning, so I'd go up there and build that fire and get the school start to be warmed up before the kids came in. But normally in the wintertime, we never even took off our coats into school because it was just so cold. But I went there 7th and 8th grade, and I learned a lot, just primarily on my own. The teacher, there was just one teacher, and she was primarily interested in teaching the youngsters, the little kids, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I just kind of had to learn on my own, and I did all right. But in New York at that time, to even if you weren't going to farm school, but to go from 8th grade to high school, you had to take basically an aptitude test, similar to a college boards like the ACT or something. But my teacher prepared me for the examination and took me to another community where I took the test, and I was admitted to high school, and I went to 4 years of high school at Herkimer High.
How old were you when you milked your first cow?
Probably 11 would be my guess, and We did have milkers. We had surge milkers, but there were a certain number of cows. It seemed like in every rotation, we kept about 30 cows milking all the time, and there always was some that would kick the milkers off. So the only way you could milk those cows is you had to take a baler twine, tie the rear legs together, and then sit down on a stool, and you had to milk them this way. And I did that for until I graduated from high school.
Well, do you think you could still milk a cow like that today?
Oh, I don't have the grip strength I'd once had, but I think I could give it a pretty good shot.
So you touched on leaving your farmhouse where you were a valedictorian for 2 grades and went to Herkimer Central High School, is that
Herkimer
correct?
Central High School, right.
So what grade levels are those?
It was 9 through 12, and there were about 400 students in the class. I remember in my graduating class in 1959, we had right at 100 students.
And jumping forward on a question, so do you still maintain contact with some of the students that you graduated with and went to high school with?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a small knit community up there, the Mohawk Valley area, which is Herkimer, Mohawk, Ilion, and another little community. Frankfort is just like a chain of communities. And there are probably 25 of my classmates that still live in that community, and they get together on a monthly basis. They used to do it for dinner. I think they've now, because of their age, they're doing it at lunchtime. I remember we went up there one time. I took you and your 2 brothers there. We went up and they had a big deal put together for us and got to meet a lot of my old classmates, and I think they gave you a lot of bad information about your dad, but and they still do that. I stay in touch with them by email or telephone call, and I just really still have very, very close friends from high school. And I even have good high school friends. Some live in Florida. One of my best friends lives out in Denton, Montana. But we played football together, and closeness, just you maintain close relationships with your friends.
When you were in high school, 9th grade through 12th grade, were you able to focus on academics, or did you also work while you were in school?
Well, when you live on a dairy farm, you wake up and go to work, and you spend a little time at school, and when you come home, you work until you eat dinner and go to bed. I mean, if anybody knows anything about dairy farming, those cows have to be milked every morning, every night. They have to be fed every morning, every night. If they're out in the pasture, you have to go out and round them up and bring them in. But there's you don't have to think about finding a part-time job when you live on a farm. And it was hard work, not just doing the farm, milking the cows, but plowing the fields. I know driving the tractor with pulling the turning plow, and when I was 11, 12 years old, and then running a disc harrow and a drag and planting and the haying season. I mean, all that is really, really difficult work. And in the wintertime up there, we had to go in the woods. We cut wood to heat our house. It was, kind of a Spartan living. Nobody had much money, but everybody had a good, close family relationship, and all the farmers helped each other out. It was a good environment.
Well, I'm going to get to your legal career in a moment, but what comes to mind is the question of, do you think that all of the hard work that you did at such a young age, as you have described, helped you once you became a lawyer and started practicing law?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I learned early on that, if you work hard and you dedicate yourself to something, you're going to be successful. It doesn't make a difference, in my mind, if you're a butcher, a baker, candlestick maker, or a lawyer. It comes with hard work and work ethic, and that's probably one of the reasons I was so tough on you boys when you were growing up. And fortunately, it worked. You're a hard worker. Matt's a hard worker. Josh's a hard worker. And, I just think that's kind of where you start, but I sure learned it at a young age.
So you're going to school, you're working on a farm. While you were in high school, were you able to enjoy sports or other activities, or did that take up all of your time?
No, I enjoyed sports. I played football. I was a quarterback on the football team and had some success. Used to pitch on the baseball team and also was a catcher. My senior year, I was kind of always wanted to go out for the track team, and so I went out for the track team my senior year, and lettered there also. I was not fast, but I could pole vault. That's what I did. I pole vaulted and threw the disc, and again, just made good close friends that I still have today. But I love football. I loved all kind of sports really, and that's really where I started in college. I was going to be a coach and I was going to be a teacher. That was kind of my goal when I went to school.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1959.
So once you graduated from high school in Herkimer, New York, what were your plans and what did you do?
Well, I didn't really have any plans. You know, my father wanted to give me that farm and build a house across the road, and I would just run the farm and kind of take care of him. My older brother had already left. He wasn't going to have anything to do with it. And I told Dad, I appreciate that, but I wasn't going to be a farmer. So consequently, he sold the farm because back in those days, you didn't have dairymen. If you got any work done, you did it yourself or your family did it. And that's why a lot of people up there had larger families. So anyway, my father sold the farm, and I had an uncle in Knoxville who was a residential housing contractor. So my dad and he got together and decided that, my dad would come down and work with him. So I migrated down here to Tennessee, and my father had bought some property in Knoxville. And I really was not a serious student in high school. But in New York, they had what was called a postgraduate year, where you could go back and clean up some of the messes you'd made during high school to qualify yourself for college. So when I came down to Knoxville, I went to Halls High School to apply for a postgraduate year, and they looked at me like I was a foreigner. I guess I was a foreigner. They never heard of it. And I remember one of the administrators there, I don't know if it was a principal or asked me if I'd graduated from high school, and I said, yeah, I graduated. They say, well, you don't need to go here. You need to go apply over at the University of Tennessee. So I went over to the University of Tennessee and filled out an application and got accepted. So that's how my college career began. The first year, because I applied really late, this was in August, I guess, when I applied, there was no housing available. I lived at home in my parents' house in Halls and drove back and forth every day to school. And then my second year, my sophomore year, I pledged a fraternity, and then I moved in a fraternity house and lived on campus the rest of the time I was there.
What fraternity was that?
Phi Sigma Kappa.
Were you involved in your fraternity? Did you hold any offices there?
I was involved too much. I mean, if I'd have spent as much time in the classroom as I did doing fraternity stuff, I'd really been a Rhodes Scholar. But I was president 2 terms, as a secretary, rush chairman. I did about everything there was to do. I was also a house manager in the fraternity house. One spring quarter, I was flat broke. And because I was president, I guess, or house manager, I had free room. And I also became the breakfast cook to get some food to take care of my food bill for that semester until I could get back and work and save some money to finish off school. But yeah, I was very active in the fraternity and was not a good undergraduate student.
Did you, in addition to what you just told us, did you work part-time anywhere when you were in college?
Well, I worked for my uncle and my dad in the house building industry. I did carpentry work, but primarily I was a little bit more artistic. I did the interior and exterior painting and staining and finishing cabinets and things of that nature. And I would work when I could on the weekends, or certainly during the summer. Until my last year in college, I took a job at Kent, Connecticut, working at Kenmore and Kenmont Camp as a camp counselor and as a water safety instructor up there.
Did you have any musical interests when you were in college?
Well, my musical interest started back when I was, I guess, I may have been in 8th grade. Bought a cheap guitar. My mom bought a cheap guitar. I taught myself how to play guitar, and I still play guitar today. I don't think I entertain anybody except myself, but all the way through college, after you take your dates home on Friday and Saturday night, the guys would go back to the fraternity house, and we would play guitar and sing songs, make music, if you want to call it that, until wee morning hours, and we'd occasionally have an adult beverage to go with it. But yeah, I still enjoy it, and like I say, I entertain myself. I gave one of my grandsons one of my guitars, Josh's son, and he plays some, and your son Riley's learning to play some. But it's been something entertaining for me. And when you get retired, you try to find things to fill in your time.
So we've talked about Herkimer, we've talked about your college days. Does anything come to mind about what was going on in society at that time, whether politically, domestically, foreign, anything of that nature?
Oh yeah. Well, not so much high school, but you know, in the 1960s, we had the civil rights movement going on. And really, Knoxville was not impacted. My realization was that Knoxville was not impacted like you'd see on TV, things going on down in Mississippi and Alabama, the horror stories. But I remember very distinctly where I was in 1963 when I had the radio on in the car and learned that John Kennedy had been assassinated. That was just a tragic period for this country. And everything that happened after that, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, and I think it was in 1968 that Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were both assassinated. And then when we had Vietnam War going on, and you've seen movies and heard tales about all the protests and in Washington and a lot of other places concerning the Vietnam War, and we had good people, good young men fleeing the United States, going to Canada to get out of the draft. We had men, young boys, 18, 19-year-old boys coming home from Vietnam that were messed up physically and mentally. It was a really pretty tumultuous time. I'm glad that I didn't have to serve, but I know that it was difficult for a lot of my friends that went.
So looking back today, you having experienced and lived through those times, do you think that impacted you at all insofar as your outlook on life?
Well, yeah, certainly. Especially, the situation in the South primarily, the situation that Dr. King was fighting. In the march at Selma, the blowing up of the churches in Birmingham, and in New York when I grew up, we didn't have that. We didn't. There were some. They called them migrant workers, but people would bring bus loads of African Americans in, and they would pick the crops. They would pick beans, or they would dig the potatoes, and then they would move on to a different location. And even when that occurred, these African American young children or black children, they went to school with us, but there was never a problem. There was never an issue. And we only had one boy in our high school that was an African American. He wasn't an athlete. He was a real scholar. I think he went on to Cornell somewhere. But if you can imagine me growing up in that environment and then coming south and seeing these signs that said colored only, white only, and the segregation that was going on in 1959. And again, I don't think Knoxville was as bad as a lot of the other places that I've seen on newsreels and other locations, but it was a real cultural shock to me during that period of time. And I know we're still dealing today with a lot of those injustices that occurred back decades ago.
What year did you graduate from college?
I graduated December 1963.
So when you graduated, what were your plans? What did you do?
Well, I told you a while ago I wanted to be a teacher and a coach. My last quarter of college, I was a science teacher, did my student teaching at Maryville Junior High School, and I taught physical education and football coaching at the high school. which was really fun. It was enjoyable, except when I started looking for a job that was going to pay me a living, there were just no jobs available for teachers, with my desire. So I had to start looking for something else to do.
So what did you do?
Well, I begged my way into law school.
Well, tell us about that.
Well, I had a good fraternity brother. I think he's still practicing law in Knoxville, Al Witt. Al was older than I was, but his brother Bob, that had Witt Lumber Company in Knoxville, Al would come up to the fraternity house during lunch. We were just a few blocks from the law school up there on Laurel Avenue, but he would come in and immediately start typing his notes, or he'd be working on briefs with his typewriter, and I just had an interest in what he was doing, and I would occasionally read some of the papers that he was working on, or I would occasionally read some of the briefs that he was doing, and it was intriguing and very interesting to me. But I never dreamed that I could even get into law school. But when this deal about teaching wasn't going to work out for me, I went down to the law school and applied. And I remember Dean Overton was the one that interviewed me, and he told me that I was wasting my time, I was wasting my money, I wasn't qualified. He kind of berated my undergraduate grades, which rightfully so. And I literally had to beg my way in that quarter. And I started law school the summer of 1964. And kind of the deal was, okay, Jenny, you got this chance. You're taking up a seat of more qualified individuals. You mess up and you're gone. So that's kind of the way I started law school.
So did you know any other lawyers or members of the legal profession before you went and applied to law school and started law school?
Of course, Al Witt was a student. We had a fraternity alum, L.B. Bolt, that practiced in Knoxville at that time. And there was another older attorney, and his name is escaping me right now, but they would occasionally come to the fraternity house after a football game. And L.B.'s son, Edmund Bolt, was a fraternity brother. So I had that connection and talked to him, and one time some of us got in a little scrape up in Granger County, and LB had to come up and straighten things out for us.
Well, you never told me about that before, but were there any special or influential professors that you had when you were in law school at Tennessee that made an impact on you?
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, I thought all the professors were really, really good professors. Some that, were kind of over the top. And we had some professors downtown, or lawyers from downtown that would come in to teach. But I remember Dick Knoll taught, he was a tort professor. And Forrest Lacey, he taught contracts and sales and security transactions, UCC. Those two guys were probably more influential. Durwood Jones, he taught corporations and some other classes. Colonel Warner Dean Warner was the dean of the law school when I was there, and he was kind of a friend of everybody, and he liked me, and we talked considerably. We had, like I say, young attorneys from downtown would come, and I remember with Wheeler Rosenbaum, he would come and teach civil procedure, he'd teach trial and appellate practice, and he would get so excited, he'd start frothing at the mouth almost. But that was, when he talked about Pennoyer versus Neff and some of those cases, Wheeler could really get excited. And Bernie Bernstein he came down and taught criminal law and criminal procedure. And I think I was in Bernie's class one day when the Miranda decision came out that really changed, interrogation and criminal law practice. But we had a tremendous amount of respect for all the teachers. I thought they really prepared us well. If you were willing to work, prepared you well for what was to come. As I mentioned, Durwood Jones and Forrest Lacey. A good friend of mine, a lawyer from Kingsport, Wayne Culbers, and I used to go out some on Saturday morning and play some tennis. and we would go down to the park down Cumberland Avenue. I can't remember the name of the park right now, but Forrest Lacey and Durwood Jones would be down there playing singles, and Culberson and I would play, and they invited us to play doubles with them one day. So Wayne and I thought, well, this is going to be a piece of cake. We're going to get back at these guys. Well, they beat us like we were a couple of rented mules. But we went back the next Saturday. We were going to get revenge, and it was the same deal. But with just being fun, being with them. They were regular people. I think Wayne and I finally had to change venues so we wouldn't have to play them anymore on the tennis courts. But I just had a great relationship with all of them. Charlie Miller ran the clinic, legal clinic, and Charlie was kind of a dry, stoic guy, but we learned a lot from him. Dean Overton, he was a great constitutional law professor. And like I say, it really, really prepared me when I got out of college, law school, and graduate. I really felt I had a really good knowledge of the law and the procedure because I'd worked pretty hard at it. I was, not only that first quarter was I scared I was going to flunk out, I looked at every quarter like it was going to be my last, and I really worked hard.
Well, how did you do academically? What was your class rank when you graduated?
Well, I graduated #1, but I don't know how that worked out because there are a lot of smart guys in my class. One of the smartest guys, a good lawyer over in Jackson, Tennessee, was Jerry Kaiser, and Jerry's probably still practicing some. Al Harvey, I think Al was a real smart guy in Memphis. I think he graduated a quarter behind me, but there were a lot of really smart attorneys. Chancellor Howell Peoples was in my class. Alex Shipley was in my class. Alex was a brilliant guy, and he died prematurely. He's reputed to be the one that broke the Watergate scandal, but I don't know how I got to be #1, except I just worked hard, kept my head down, and studied all the time.
Well, do you think getting up at 4:30 in the morning and milking cows had anything to do with your success?
Well, yeah, I knew I didn't want to go back to that life. But I tell you, I was lucky the last year and a half of law school. Of course, I was married at the time. But I got a job working under the police department at the car pound. So I went to work from 3 to 11 every day. So I'd go to get my classes in from 8 to 2, and then I would get to work from 3 to 11. And after about 5 or 6 o'clock, this is where they pull cars in for illegally parking or wrecked or something like that. After about 5 or 6 o'clock, I had that time to just do nothing but study with no distraction, and that really helped me. And we get close to final exams, and one of my good friends that is deceased now is Tom Rasnick. And he would come out, and Tom and I would study, analyze, reanalyze, and when I took a test in law school, we didn't have multiple choice. Everything was essay at that time. And I got, particularly in torts, because I know Professor Noel liked this, I would, in my answer, I'd write out what the majority opinion would be, and if Tennessee was in the minority, I would name that, and then I would give the restatement position, and that's how I got A's under Dick Knoll. Like I say, I worried every quarter until I graduated that I was going to flunk out, and just made me work harder. And I took that same work ethic into my legal practice, and I've done that for 55 years or so.
You've mentioned a lot of your classmates that you spent time with in law school. Did you remain close to some of those classmates even today?
Oh, sure. You know, Wayne Culberson and I, Wayne had a place down in Destin, Florida. I've got a little place down there, and we would meet up and play golf. One of my really, really close friends was Johnny Mitchell, a fine lawyer over in Murfreesboro. He had a accident, some injury a few years back, and has a hearing problem, but still stay in touch with them. Russell Bean, who was a judge in Chattanooga, was in my class, and Russell and I have stayed close. We continue to communicate. And Hal Peoples, Chancellor Peoples, we were close, and we would get together, for different occasions, football or something, come up to the house for dinner. A lot of my West Tennessee contacts are just so far away that have not kept close touch with them, but still keep close contact with a lot of my fraternity brothers from Knoxville.
Were you also in a legal fraternity in law school?
I was Phi Delta Phi. I know I was president one time. I may have been secretary on another occasion. Again, a long time ago.
How would you assess, Dad, the value of a law school education and your particular law school curriculum at the University of Tennessee at that time?
Well, I thought it was invaluable, and the conversation used to be at that time that if you want to be a lawyer, learn the law, go to University of Tennessee. If you want to learn theory, go to Vanderbilt. And when I got out of law school, my first job was up at Bristol, Tennessee, so we didn't have much competition against Vanderbilt people. But as I stated before, when I went to work, I pretty much knew what to do. I mean, I started learning a lot, but I knew how to get a lawsuit filed. I knew how to investigate. I knew how to do legal research. Knew how to do writing. But the University of Tennessee really, really prepared, I thought, anyone that would work at it would prepare them really well. Now, I had some friends and some classmates that were probably a lot smarter than I was. I know they were, but they just wouldn't work. They wouldn't study, so consequently, they didn't make as good grades. And when they got out of law school, they were kind of like a fish out of water. They weren't real sure, and it took a lot of them some time to get traction and get going. But a lot of my law school classmates have done really well. This Wayne Culberson I mentioned, Wayne is my age, and I think he's still working 6.5 days a week in Kingsport, and he just doesn't need to do that, but that's his life.
So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit here and talk about your immediate family. Some of the lawyers and judges in West Tennessee probably don't know this, but you're married to Patty Harris Jenne.
Right.
So where is Patty Harris Jenne from?
Patty was from Greenfield, Tennessee, a little town in Weakley County. Her father was Judge Phil Harris, great father-in-law, as far as I know, a great judge, a great lawyer. But Patty and I met and married, and she's just been a wonderful wife and wonderful mother. Judge Harris and Mrs. Harris were just wonderful people to be around, and we always had our Christmases over there together, and they would come up and visit. Before Judge Harris got older, he was just an avid Tennessee football fan. I can't remember what year it was, but it's the first time we'd beat Alabama in a long time, several years ago. Judge Harris was seen walking down Cumberland Avenue helping to carry the goalpost. But he was a great guy, and Patty's sister was Suzanne Harris Wells. She married Hunter Wells, who was a radiologist in Jackson. He's retired now, but Hunter was from Dresden, same place that Governor McWhorter was from, and David Wells, his brother, was on Court of Criminal Appeals. So, we had a big connection over there, and through Judge Harris, got to know Joe Riley and Steve Stafford and some of the other judges, and even a judge in Memphis, and blanking on it now, Butch
Childers?
Butch Childers, yeah. We were working on that. Well, it was a legal malpractice case in Memphis that finally got settled, thankfully. But we had some motions before Judge Childers, and I had talked to Judge Harris a week or so ago, and he said, "You make sure you tell old Butch as Phil said hi." And that was a good icebreaker. We had a good conversation, and all the judges that I worked before, West Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, East Tennessee, and most of the states that I practiced in. I went all over Tennessee, but I did a lot of out-of-state work too. Just had a tremendous respect for the bar.
So tell us about your wonderful children, knowing that one of them is sitting here.
Well, I do have 3 fine sons. Mike is going to be 58 years old here in another month. Matt's going to be 55 years old come March, and Josh is going to be 46. But all wonderful. You know, I'm always proud of my children and grandchildren. I've never been one of these that says, well, I'm ashamed of you for this. A lot of times you did things, all of you did, that I didn't particularly like, and I was ashamed of what you did, but I wasn't ashamed of you. Interesting story about you three boys, though. If you remember, all of you said, I'm never coming back to Cleveland to live. I don't know where I'm going, but I'm never coming back to Cleveland. And y'all said, and we're never going to be lawyers. And I said, well, why wouldn't you want to be a lawyer? Think about that. So you have to work too hard, Dad. Well, as it turns out, a blessing, all three of you boys moved back to Cleveland. Two of you became lawyers. The smart one became a banker. But it's just been wonderful to have my children here, my daughters-in-law, and more importantly, my grandchildren.
Tell us about your grandchildren.
Oh, gosh, I've got some fabulous grandchildren. How much time do we have? My favorite granddaughter, my only granddaughter, your oldest, is Ashton. She did wonderful at Baylor High School in Chattanooga, wonderful at Washington Lee, and she's doing wonderful at Wake Forest Law School. She graduates this next year. And she has been an outstanding individual, outstanding student, and we still text and communicate and have telephone communication quite frequent with her. Your son, Riley, is another wonderful grandchild, and he's finished his third year at Harvard. I don't know that he's interested in law, but he would make a great lawyer because he's really good at arguing. But on your two children, as you know, in high school, I love sports, and Ashton played on the tennis team at Baylor. She even played on the high school team. When she was in 8th grade, I think she was on 5 state championships, 8th grade through high school. Riley played football. He was on the track team. He was an all-state football player, and he's now playing football at Harvard. Matt's two sons, wonderful. The oldest, Will, is now in law school down at Montgomery, Alabama. Jake is going to Tennessee Tech, studying finance. And then Josh's three boys, 2 of them are in high school in Chattanooga. One of them is in elementary school down there. So I've got wonderful grandchildren, wonderful children. And we spend a lot of time in football stadiums, basketball courts, tennis courts, but that's kind of life that I love.
You kind of touched on this, but would you recommend the law or a legal career not only to your children or grandchildren, but to any young person that's looking to go to law school?
Oh, absolutely. The law has changed a lot during my career. We can talk about that maybe if you'd like. But I think a law degree opens a lot of doors, even if you decide that you never want to practice law. For instance, my grandson, Will, he has a theology degree. He decided to go to law school. And I don't think he's looking to practice law. It may surprise me, but I think he's looking to use his legal training in supporting, church projects and litigation that goes on in church, that type of thing. But a law degree is great. I mean, humanity is full of conflict. That's never going to go away. And lawyers are trained to deal with conflict and help their clients or friends or family, whoever, navigate conflict and hopefully get to a reasonable resolution without having to have a duel with arms.
Well, you mentioned Will. So are you also a great-grandfather? I
am. Little shepherd Paul Jenne will be 1 year old next month in November. A cute little kid. Will's wife is a youth minister for a large church there in Auburn. They live in Auburn, and he commutes back and forth to Montgomery because that's where her employment was. And Will works at the law library down there at the law school.
So you graduate from law school, and what year was that again?
66.
1966. You took the bar exam, I'm assuming.
I did, February 67.
Where did you take it?
Took it in Knoxville, to University of Tennessee.
So I'm reluctant to ask this question, but I will because I've never asked it before. Did you pass it the first time?
I did. but like everybody else, I was scared to death. I'd already moved to Bristol, working up there, and at that time they used to send telegrams out. They probably send emails now, but I got that telegram and I was shaking, opened it up, learned that I'd passed the bar, and some of my other friends, like I said, up there, Wayne Culberson and Tom Rasnick. I remember Larry Boyd in Rogersville. A whole carload of us loaded up and we drove all the way to Jackson to get sworn in. We were just anxious to get going. But like I said, right after I took the bar, I had this job in Bristol, went up there and started to work. And these guys had me going to court before I even learned that I'd passed the bar. And this is small claims court, general sessions court, or even over into Bristol, Virginia, to small claims court. They had a little comedy agreement to allow the lawyers to move back and forth across state lines. But and I don't remember, it seems like it was April or May that we found out, and we went over there as soon as we could, because Supreme Court was sitting in Jackson at that time.
At the time that you were about to graduate from Tennessee Law School or graduated, did the law school at that time have a placement office to help third-year students locate jobs like they do now?
Not as such. They did have law firms that were looking to hire attorneys. The law firm would typically call the law school and say, we'd like to come in and have an interview session or interview day. And but I don't think the university had a particular placement office. But I interviewed 2 or 3 different firms, and I remember one was the McKnight Law Firm in Memphis, and that was very tempting. I think his only client was the Holiday Inn, but it was a big client. But I was full of vinegar. I wanted to get out. I wanted to start trying cases. I just didn't want to settle on one thing. The law firm in Knoxville, Morton and Lewis, I did a little work for them when I was in law school. And a good friend, John King, worked for them, and they were interested in me, but I kind of wanted to get out of Knoxville, and I had this opportunity to go to Bristol, so that's where I went.
How did you get with this law firm in Bristol? Did you contact them? Did they contact you? How did that happen?
No, they were one of the firms that contacted the law school, and there's 2 of them, Frank Slaughter and Wendell Jackson. They came in and they were interviewing a bunch of students and interviewed me, and thought it was a pretty good interview. And I got a call a week or so later from them and told me they'd like me to come to work for them, and offered me $400 a month, and that was big pay back then. That was probably one of the highest paid positions, unless you went with the FBI or something like that. So we talked and struck up a deal, and I went up there for 2 years. I practiced with them for 2 years.
What was the name of that firm?
Slaughter and Jackson.
What was the size of the firm? How many lawyers did you have?
Well, there were just 2. I was the 3rd attorney. It used to be Slaughter, Byers, Eisenhower, and Jackson. And the Byers was John Byers, who later became when I got up there, he had migrated. He was a circuit court judge, but he eventually got to the Court of Appeals. And Luther Eisenhower, that firm split up, and Luther Eisenhower became the county attorney. So it was just Frank Slaughter and Wendell Jackson. I think Frank is deceased now, and he went on the bench at some point in time. And I think Frank has a son that practices in Bristol. Wendell has, last I heard from him, he lives living in Kingsport. And I think he may have had some disciplinary issues. I'm not real sure, but I've not seen him in a number of years.
So you said that you were making $400 a month, and this was in 1966?
Yes.
How did that...
67 is when I actually started up there.
Okay, 67. How did that compare as to income in other professions, if you know?
Well, I never really tried to compare it. I knew the doctors were always making more money, but $400 a month at that time was, it was a pretty good salary to start out. I remember I was paying about $125 a month for rent, and water bill was in the teens. So, I had enough money just on that salary to pay all the bills and the rent and to have a little left over, to the point where I was there about a year and a half and had enough money. We bought a house. And about 3 months after we bought the house, I decided to leave Bristol, but that all worked out too.
Do you remember being a young lawyer your very first day at work at the law firm?
The funniest thing about the first day and the last time I saw Wendell Jackson, he reminded me of this. In the men's room, they had these old cloth towels that you pull down, and Wendell wrote on the dispenser, "When the towels run out, call Roger," and put my name on. And he was telling me they since sold that building, but he told me the last time he was in there that my name was still in the men's room. So that was my major assignment. But as a young lawyer, I got to do everything anybody else did not want to do. But I learned a lot. I mean, I put in a lot of hours up there. I learned a lot that really prepared me and gave me, I think, a leg up when I came to Cleveland against the other local Cleveland attorneys.
Well, explain that. What did you learn at that very early stage of your career that helped you down the road as your career evolved?
Well, I would, of course, Frank and Wendell, they had a lot of personal injury cases, workers' compensation cases. I would normally get to work on the lousy ones. And if I took a lousy case and got it in really good shape where it could be win, one of them would take it back over. So I never got to try any of the good ones. But I learned that, to get out and do your own investigation, and I really enjoyed that and still do. But I would get out and take photographs. I would take measurements. I would get with the police officers, to make sure I knew the facts, all the facts, before I started digging in, because you can't really ascertain what is the pertinent law to apply unless you know the facts. And I've seen through the years a lot of attorneys go off what I call half-cocked and just not know the facts until they get in the courtroom. And those type of folks would normally have a case blow up on them, and then when that happens, their clients get mad at them because they didn't bother to learn the facts. So I learned early on to investigate, interview witnesses, get the proper law that was applied, whether it was case law or statutory law, and then prepare my case on a good foundation.
So I believe you told us that you practiced law there maybe 2 years, is that right?
Yes, yeah. I started in Cleveland January of 1969.
So what led you from Bristol, Tennessee to Cleveland, Tennessee?
Well, I liked Frank and Wendell. I liked all the lawyers and judges up there. I had some fantastic lawyers and judges, but really the business arrangement didn't work out the way I understood it was going to work out. And they wanted to change the name of the firm to Slaughter, Jackson, and Jenne, but I was still going to be a salaried employee, and I didn't think that was the deal we'd worked out. And Colonel Warner, Dean Warner, that I had told you was a friend, I simply called him up and told him that I was really a little disenchanted and was going to look elsewhere and ask for his recommendation. And coincidentally, at that time, this law firm in Cleveland, Elliott and Good, they were looking for a young litigator. They had a young attorney working for them, and for whatever reason it didn't work out. So that young attorney, which is a litigator, left, and they were looking for someone. So the Dean Warner hooked Joe Good and I up. We met at the law school one Saturday before a football game, and just got to talking. It was kind of an informal interview, and then from Bristol, came down to Cleveland, I guess a few weeks after that time, and met Mr. Elliott, J.Y. Elliott, and Joe and their families. And they made me a pretty significant offer, more money than I was making in Bristol, with essentially a guarantee that, if everything works out after a year, we're going to make you a partner. And I was thinking, well, I've heard that song before, but I'll give it another shot. If it doesn't work out, I'll get a job in the Social Security Administration or something. But I came to Cleveland in '69, and like I said, I thought I had a pretty good work ethic at that time. And to my advantage, there was a a case in that law firm that had been filed and was already set for trial when this other young lawyer left. So the file was handed to me to try the case in about a month. I had about 4 weeks or 6 weeks maybe. And it was it was a fall down, slip and fall case against Sears Roebuck and Company. And my predecessor lawyer had taken no photographs, no medical depositions, and really done nothing. So I knew what had to be done, and I got it done in a short period of time and came in this very courtroom with Judge Carmichael as the judge and won a fall down case and got a pretty decent verdict for that day. So all of a sudden, I was just not this young kid lawyer in town. I was this new lawyer, came to town, and I started getting business right away, just from that one case. And then immediately, shortly thereafter, at that time, there was a case going in federal court of redistricting Bradley County. And the lawyer that was handling that is deceased now, is Reginald Heiberger. He came and talked to me and asked me if I would represent a class in redistricting the school board. So I did that and filed that litigation in federal court. And I'd had experience in federal court in Greenville, so I wasn't particularly green. And we were successful. We didn't have to try the case once we got it ready. We got a redistricting plan put together not only for the county but for the school board, and I think that's probably still in place today. But I was really lucky that early on I had those two successful experiences. Cleveland was a small community, a small bar association, but a good bar association. But very quickly I became known as a new trial lawyer in town. And people started referring me business. The clerks were really good to me, and it just kind of progressed from there.
What was the population of Cleveland back in 1969?
I think it was about 35,000 when I got here.
When you came to Cleveland to practice with Elliott Good, was it just the three of you once you got here?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this will be.
I was the third lawyer. And I hadn't been here, I guess I'd not been here a year and a half maybe. And my practice was really pushing me because I had a lot of clientele. So a young man from Bradley County, Bob Varnell, was coming back from Vietnam, and he had graduated from Vandy Law School. And I met Bob. He was just a little younger than I am, but he came to work to help me in the litigation field. And it turned out Robert just wasn't cut out for litigation. He was more of a transactional guy, so he moved over to help Joe Good and Mr. Elliott with the real estate, title searches, taxation, that type of thing. And then I eventually got Robert Scott. Scott was working with Conrad Fennell and Jim Thompson, but got Scotty to come with us, and he was just a great close friend. And then we hired Charlie Burns, so we had Elliott Good, Jenne, Varnell, Scott, and Burns. A pretty good full service law firm for a few years. And then Scotty and I, in 1981, we decided to do our own thing because we were litigators and rainmakers. We started our own business.
Well, we've been going a little bit over an hour. This would be a great time to take a few minute break.
Perfect.
Dad, tell us a little bit about your areas of practice and whether that changed or evolved over time.
Well, yes, as a young attorney, you're basically hoping somebody will walk in the door to see you, and we even worked on half a day Saturday here. And early on, I had a lot of domestic stuff because of early success in a personal injury case. I started getting some automobile accident cases, some workers' compensation cases. There was always a lot of domestic cases. As I got to know and make friends, set up some small business corporations for small entities. And it's kind of the way it started. And early on, I did a lot of criminal defense work too. And in those days, you didn't do a lot of plea dealing. Sometimes you did, but we tried a lot of cases. I tried a lot of cases in criminal court here, and Bradley County. Of course, this is where I live, but Hamilton County, Chattanooga is just down the road. I handled cases in Hamilton County, and that's where the federal district court is, Knoxville. But it just kind of expanded, and I was never too excited about handling a malpractice case or professional liability case. A lot of time back at that day, a lot of lawyers were just filing these things as nuisance lawsuits, embarrassing the doctors and getting a cheap payout for the client. And I always stayed away from that. But I had over my career, I think 6 medical malpractice cases, and I won them all, or they settled, except for one that I tried in Chattanooga that I should have won. And I had some professional liability cases, legal liability cases against some attorneys, a lot of construction contract litigation. I handled cases in Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, a medical malpractice case over in Georgia. I even had one out in Pecos, Texas. But anyway, my private practice just kind of continued to grow more along the lines of the personal injury litigation. Toward the end of my practice, the workers' compensation law got changed. And workers' compensation used to yield a good bit of money for plaintiffs' attorneys back in the day. Of course, domestic laws have changed. There's just been a lot of change since I started practicing law, not only the substantive, but the procedure, and a lot of change in the personality of the people you have to deal with at that time. But I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of a quick overview of how it evolved. When Scotty and I started our practice in 1961 together, we were both, just inundated with, what I would say good, solid business. And as I said, Scotty was not only my law partner, but one of my best friends. And about every day, if we were not in court, we'd go down here to the YMCA and play racquetball, work out a little bit during lunch. And unfortunately, in June of 1984, he was on his way down to City Court in Chattanooga to get a case postponed, and a lady cut him off, and his car rolled over. He was ejected and died as a result of that accident. And that was a really difficult time traumatically for me, losing a friend and my business partner. Plus the back end of it, all of a sudden I had to handle the workload of 2 lawyers that had a lot of cases. I remember writing all of Scotty's clients letters and telling them what happened and inviting them to pick up their file, and I would cooperate in a transition, or if they would prefer, I would continue to represent them, but they would have to understand that there was going to be some lag time. And I think maybe 5 people left. So all of a sudden, I have my practice, which was booming at that time, and then I've got Scotty's practice. So it was like 6.5, 7 days a week from 7 to 11. And it was very exhausting for, at least a year or more. I mean, it's not just tough on me, but tough on my family. You children didn't have time for family life like I've been accustomed to. But worked through that, and Randy Sellers was working for me at that time as an associate, and later got Mitchell Bryant came in as an associate. And Mitchell was still with me as an associate when you decided to leave that big Baker Donaldson law firm and come back to Cleveland. And that was a great day of my life. And we decided at that time we just wanted a family practice. So you and your wife, Nan, who was, maybe one of the smartest Jenne lawyers, came to work. And then it wasn't long after that before Josh got out of Sanford and came here, and we had a great family practice until you messed it up by becoming a judge.
Well, you've had a lot of trial experience, Dad. You kind of touched on some of it. In your opinion, what makes a good trial lawyer?
Well, first you have to have, I think, just some common sense, some street sense. You got to know your facts. You got to investigate, and you got to be able to look at both sides of the case, and analyze the weaknesses. In your case, if you're a plaintiff, and analyze your strengths and how you're going to deal with those weaknesses and how you're going to capitalize on the strengths. And you do the same on the other side of the case, you look at the, any particular strength or weakness that the defense may have, and to me, it's all about preparation, and a lot of times when you do that, the case gets reasonably resolved. Wasn't any mediation going on back when I was a young lawyer. That didn't come into vogue until later. I did some arbitration on construction contract cases where, my client had signed an AIA contract that required arbitration. And as a result of that, I became an arbiter of the American Arbitration Panel out of Atlanta, and I did some arbitration work myself back early on. But then I got really too busy to pursue that. But, once you get your case properly prepared, then it's a matter of being honest with the jury. If you're trying it before the jury or if you're trying it before a judge. Juries, I think, are for the most part, they're very perceptive. They work and take their job as a juror very seriously. And they can tell when you're being less than sincere with them, or you're shading the truth, you're trying to cut corners, or you're just trying to sell them something that's not there. And I was thinking about this the other day. Give you an example of what I'm talking about. Had a case I defended over in Polk County that the young man that was involved in an automobile accident got sued for way in excess of his coverage. His mother was worked down at the First Citizens Bank, where I did some work for the bank, and she asked me if I would defend her son for this excess coverage. So I did, went to Polk County, and a very fine lawyer out of Knoxville represented the plaintiff, and he came down and he sat up the plaintiff's side of the courtroom like it was a Sears Roebuck store. He had a skeleton over there, he had a shadow box, he had all these big charts, and all it was a soft tissue injury. And anyway, this fine lawyer put on the best case he could. His client didn't hold up very well under cross-examination. And the young lawyer that was representing the insurance company for the defense hadn't been practicing very long. We got to closing argument, and I turned to him and I said, "Do you want to handle this, or do you want me to?" And he said, "If you don't mind, go ahead and handle that, Roger." And I thought I had the jury, pretty much on my side on cross-examination. So I stood up and I simply said, "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, I've got a friend, he's a huge guy, and his name is Woody, and he's always running off at the mouth, telling all these crazy stories, being a big blowhard. And I always told Woody, I said, when you die, we're either going to have to bury you in a boxcar because you're so big, or we'll give you an enema and bury you in a shoebox. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, that case over there needs to go in a shoebox. And some of the jurors started chuckling. And in Polk County Courthouse, you could hear everything, but the jury went out and they were laughing and giggling. They stayed about long enough to pick a jury for them, and I guess 5 minutes, and they came in and found for the defense. And that was a case where the plaintiff's lawyer tried to feed the jury something that they knew just was not correct. So when you lose the trust of a jury or you lose the trust of a judge, you've lost the case, in my opinion.
Well, you've touched on this a little bit, talking about the different places that you practiced and tried cases and handling cases throughout Tennessee, Texas, North Carolina, Georgia, and whatnot. What was it like to practice, first of all, in another county outside of Bradley County, where is your hometown, where you have your office? What was it like to go into other counties up and down East Tennessee and throughout the state?
This judicial district had Bradley, Polk, McMinn, and Meigs, and Monroe in it. And the Chancery Division originally was a 15-county division that included Meigs County and Bledsoe County, went all the way over to Winchester. We had two chancellors, Chancellor Earl Henley and then Chancellor Stewart, L.F. Frick Stewart, who was Jeff Stewart's dad. So we had a small circuit division and a really large Chancery division. And going to these other counties, in Chancery Court, you're not dealing with the jury, you're dealing with the judge, the same chancellor that I was dealing with here, and they knew me. I respected them, they respected me, and I was very well received. I always made it a point to meet the clerks. And if I went to a county where I did not know the judges, like up in Sevier County, Chancellor Rainwater, I tried a case up there one time, and I made a point to get there early to introduce myself to him and just have some, nothing about the case, but just who I am and what I do. But I made a point to do that in these different counties and different states, and was always very well received. I never, you always worry about, I guess, home cooking in some of these other counties. I don't remember the judge's name, but I had a case one time over in McMinn County, or not McMinn, McMinnville, the only case I had over there. And the judge locked the door. Once he started court, locked the door, and you couldn't get out, you couldn't get back in. So if you weren't in the right time, you got locked out. And I was over there one day on some motions hearing my client got locked out. The judge got mad because my client wasn't in the courtroom. And anyway, fortunately, that case resolved without having to try it. But very rarely did that happen. I always felt comfortable and well received in other jurisdictions and other venues in the state.
What about other states when you went into Texas or Florida or Georgia?
The Texas case was one of the fun cases I had. I represented a young man from here in Cleveland who was a truck driver, and he was involved in a bad accident in Stockton, Texas, Fort Stockton, with another truck driver. And all the witnesses and the investigation and everything was in Texas. I could have filed it in Tennessee because the defendant trucking company was Swift, and they do business in Tennessee. But I decided to associate a really fine lawyer in Midland, Texas, and we went out and tried that case in Pecos. And to get to Pecos, you fly into Odessa, Midland, and then you rent a car and drive 3 hours west through, all you see is oil wells and tumbleweeds, and you finally come to this really literal little hole in the wall where they had this huge, beautiful new federal courthouse. And that's where we tried the case. We tried it for a week out there. But this part of Texas, the federal district in that part of Texas is bigger than the state of Utah. So they brought jurors in from way out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, they had to house them. There was one motel there, so the jurors were staying in the same motel that defense counsel and plaintiff's counsel were staying. But we got along well with the lawyers, and I can't remember the judge's name right now, but he was a former U.S. senator. Very nice guy, very polite, courteous, welcoming to me, and we were very successful. We had a seven-figure verdict out there, and that was, but it was just enjoyable for me to be in that environment. I had cases in North Carolina and basically had the same response. The case I had up in Virginia, one of them, that turned into a legal malpractice case. The judge did not take too kindly to me and my associate, Tom Rasnick. Tom was licensed in Virginia, and he let it be known, and Tom found some information that required the judge to recuse himself. And that was a good move on our part. When he recused himself, this case was pending in Roanoke, Virginia. They assigned a judge from up in Fairfax, Virginia, Northern Virginia, who excellent judge. He was a retired judge, but he treated us with the utmost courtesy. But that was quite a case. Went all over the state of Virginia taking depositions and got ready for trial. The night before the trial, case got settled for in the over seven figures. But
for your client?
Yeah, for my client. Had products liability cases up there, mining accident cases, med-mal cases in Georgia. But I always felt well received because I got prepared, and I think judges appreciate when you come into their court when you're honest, you're candid, and you're prepared. So I never felt like I had a problem.
Well, you touched on this, that back in your day when you were trying a lot of cases, mediation and alternative dispute resolution had really not come to light yet. And you tried a lot of jury trials. What was your philosophy or any tricks, if you will, that you used when picking a jury?
Well, just, being honest and expecting honest answers from the jurors. And here in Bradley County, early on, after I was here a couple of years, I knew a lot of the jurors, and the jurors knew me. You just kind of sense what makes them tick, what might make them prejudiced against you, how you might appeal to their senses. I remember the first jury case, criminal case I tried here in Bradley County. It was before a very fine judge and later good friend, Jim Witt, Kerwood Witt's dad. And I represented 3 guys that were charged with theft of copper from up here at Olin Company. And they were young guys, and the Attorney General wouldn't work at anything reasonable, so we just had to try the case. But since there were 3 defendants, I had a lot of peremptory challenges, and there weren't not enough jurors here, and the judge wouldn't give me a continuance. So I basically exercised all my peremptory challenges, and there weren't enough jurors to try the case. So Judge Witt was upset with me, and he started bringing jurors in off the street. You could just randomly go out and jerk them into court, and that didn't sit well with some of these jurors. And then when we started trying the case, Judge Witt was on me from the beginning to the end. I'd ask a question, and the state would not object to it. He'd say, "Objection sustained." But anyway, he treated me so badly during the course of that trial. One of the jurors, the new realtor named Zane Harris, told me after the case was over with, he said, "We didn't care if they were guilty or not. There wasn't any reason for that judge to treat you that way."
What, if any, changes in the practice of law have you seen since you started back in 1967?
Well, it's like daylight and dark, really. You think about, first from the procedural standpoint, when I went to law school, we learned about filing complaints, demurs, pleas and abatement, plea of confession and avoidance. There was no rules of civil procedure, at least in state court. 1970, when these rules of civil procedure were put in place, I had to relearn all over again, but it was not that difficult. So procedurally, it changed dramatically in a few short years after I started practicing. We did have the federal rules but didn't spend all that much time on them. The substantive laws and statutory laws have changed a lot. I mentioned maybe workers' compensation. The domestic laws, caps and personal injury cases, medical malpractice requirements, just to name a few. But that part of it, like I say, it was like daylight and dark. I think the civility of the legal profession has really fallen on bad times in recent years. It used to be in Cleveland when I first came. It was a small town, and at 10:30 in the morning, the lawyers would take a coffee break, and we would meet over across the street at Central Drug Store or over here at Earl's, and we would have coffee, and the older lawyers would help the younger lawyers. We had some World War II veterans here that were, came back to practice. They were still practicing, but they would help young lawyers. They would answer a question for you. You don't get that today, to my knowledge. I did last week. I ran into a local lawyer, and a young man. I was talking to him and about his practice and how it was going. I told him if I could do anything to help him, I'd be glad to. But and he said he appreciated that. But I've mentored 2 lawyers in my life, and that's you and your brother Josh. And so far, you've done okay.
Well, you talked to us about some of your cases. Are there any other special cases that you handled and or tried that still remain significant to you for whatever reason?
Well, there are a lot of them. And you were with me on this one medical malpractice case that still gets me emotional. It was the most emotional case that I've ever handled in my life. And it was so emotional that at the end of the case, even the defense attorney was tearing up in this very courtroom. But it was a sad case where there was birth trauma, and it was unbelievable because it was this young girl was having her first baby, so her husband set up a video camera in the labor and delivery room. So this case was on video. And they, came and talked to me about the case, and I told them I'd get the medical records, which I did, and the fellow says, by the way, I was videoing this thing, and this is that video if you want to take a look at it. Well, anyway, one Sunday afternoon, rainy afternoon, I was going through these medical records down there, and everything looked pretty benign to me. I just wasn't sure, even though there was a bad birth trauma, that could do anything with it. And I stuck this video in the recorder, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, hey, what I'm seeing here is not what I just read. But anyway, what had happened during the course of this labor and delivery, there was an arrest of descent. The baby stopped moving down the birth canal, and instead of electing, and this was a first baby for this young lady, instead of going to a C-section, the OBGYN started using a vacuum extractor, and the baby's vertex was at mid-station, and which is up the birth canal, and now a vacuum extractor is kind of like a suction cup. And anyway, you could see in this video this doctor pulling on his vacuum extractor to deliver the baby, and coincidentally at that time her husband was the anesthesiologist, and he got up on top of her using extreme fundal pressure, trying to push this baby down the birth canal. So you got the OB down here pulling, and there were 7 pop-offs, and the baby went into a shoulder dystocia. And while all this was going on, it took about 30 minutes. They never called a pediatrician in. They never, made any preparation. And this little infant was finally born with an APGAR of 1, just barely alive. And anyway, we came into this courtroom and tried the case. And I put the husband on as I put the defendant doctor on as the first witness, the anesthesiologist. The OB's the insurance company paid their limits, so we went to trial on the anesthesiologist. And after 4 days of trial, they rolled over and paid us big time too. But when I say it was emotional, the husband, when he testified right after I put on the defendant doctor, and he wasn't anything intentional about it. It was just natural. He started tearing up and got emotional, and then we put the other proof on in the middle of the case, and I put the mother on as the last witness, and she was up there. She had kept a diary, and I had to read 5 or 6 excerpts from the diary, and she was crying. I was crying. The jury was crying. The defense lawyer was crying, and the judge was up there wiping tears on his eyes. The judge called a noon recess, and at that time I could hear the other lawyer across the hall yelling at the insurance claims people. And anyway, they came up, and it was a big seven-figure settlement. But that was the most emotional case I was ever involved in, and I still think about that. And I occasionally run into this young couple in the community, very fine people. He was an engineer. She worked in the bank. Nothing changed in their life. He continued working. She continued working. They had other children that are grown adults now, and really, really fine family. But I'll never forget them.
While we're on the topic of trials, as your son, I've seen and heard some stories over the years about Roger Jenne's trial antics or tactics. Do you have any special stories that you'd like to share?
Oh, I'm not sure what comes to mind. I know that when I had a case, I guess it was the last jury case I tried in this courtroom, there were 4 or 5 defense attorneys, and most of them had either no hair or gray hair. And I remember the judge in some of these pretrial hearings made the comment, how's the jury going to keep you guys separated? Y'all got dark suits and gray hair. And so this was February. I came into court to voir dire the jury, and I had on a seersucker suit and white bucks. And when I got my time to voir dire, I said something, I guess you want to know why I'm in here dressed like a clown. And I told them, that I represent the good guys. I want you to know I represent the good guys. And during voir dire, the defense attorney, one of them even said, yeah, Mr. Jenne represents the good guys, but just that kind of crazy addict, they attached me to my clients, and we won the case. And the reason I mentioned that, some young lawyer not too long ago said he thought one of the finest moves I made in the case. Had another crazy case. It wasn't necessarily an addict, but represented in Polk County again, a fellow that had been involved in an automobile accident, and he was a paranoid schizophrenic. And this was it's a reported case of McNabb versus Highway Incorporated. And this other driver was headed southbound on Highway 411, and where they were doing bridge construction work, Highway Incorporated had some Jersey barriers there, and this southbound driver fell asleep, hit those Jersey barriers, and knocked the car over, hit my client head on the northbound lane, and he became a paraplegic. As typical, the driver in the southbound lane had minimal insurance limits. So I filed 2 separate lawsuits, one against that driver of the truck, and they paid off immediately. And then I sued Highway Incorporated in a separate lawsuit based upon the defective placement of those Jersey barriers. And I spent a lot of time, a lot of money on it. The trial judge actually granted summary judgment, dismissed my case, and went to the Court of Appeals. They reversed it, and the Supreme Court took it, and they upheld the Court of Appeals, so sent it back for trial. But as I said, my client was a paranoid schizophrenic. He's now deceased. But after the first day of trial, I had him set up over here in a motel. I sent a team over to get him, pick him up to get him to Polk County, and he was gone, just missing. I thought first he may have gone to the Cracker Barrel or something, and the motel lady said, no, he left her in the middle of the night. So got your wife on it, Nan. She tracked him down. She found out that he checked out in the middle of the night, got a taxi cab, took a taxi cab north of Knoxville, checked in under a motel under an assumed name. So second day of trial, I don't have a client. I go back to court and tell the judge, my client has had a real bad night. Is it all right if we proceed in his absence? It was okay with the judge. It was okay for the defense. So we did. And I put on my very best evidence. I had highway engineer expert, accident reconstruction expert, my medical depositions. I had computer animation, and I got all that in that morning. And at lunch break, I told the defense lawyer, if we're ever going to settle this case, it's got to be settled at lunchtime. In the meantime, Nan, my daughter-in-law, your wife, had found not only where he was, found his brother. His brother went to get the client, was headed back to Polk County. And during that lunch hour, the risk management guy for the insurance company from Philadelphia was down here. And they got together and got insurance companies on the phone and worked out a really big 7-figure structured settlement. But I think if the defense had said, well, we're not going to settle this, we offered you all the money we're going to, I'd have had to non-suit it. But that was a significant result in a very, very difficult case.
So you've told us that you're 82 years old. How many times have you tried to retire over the last 20 years?
Well, I think I started when I was 70 years old. But I have some friends that have brought me back in to do some stuff and some old clients. And I'm currently working on a case, and it happens to be pending in Polk County, with another attorney, for some former clients and former friends. And actually they grew up as young kids and neighbors, and they just wanted me to help them for some reason, so I'm doing my best to hang in there.
So you're still practicing law to some extent, and you've mentioned trying a lot of cases in this courtroom. Now that I'm a judge, how does that affect you insofar as your ability to practice in this judicial district and selection of judges, and how does that work?
Well, of course, you can't hear any cases that I have, and I don't think you hear any cases that your brother Josh has. But Judge Sharp, the other circuit court judge, he's, I think he's a great judge. I kind of helped him when he was back practicing law. He predominantly did real estate work, but he handled some litigation. And whenever he would get in a situation, he would call me for some guidance. Chancellor Gerald Bryant practiced before her a number of years, and I think, she and I have not always gotten along, just like you don't always get along with everybody, but I think there's mutual respect, mutual admiration, and get along well trying cases in her court.
What have you enjoyed the most about being a lawyer and a trial lawyer in particular?
I think just helping people. Sometimes you get to help people handle a case, get them a good recovery. Sometimes you can give them emotional counseling. Sometimes you can actually physically do some things that helps, someone that really needs your help. I guess maybe a year and a half ago, there was this friend of mine who had been trying to get VA benefits. He had PTSD, been trying for years unsuccessfully. He had some non-lawyer in Washington trying to help him. And anyway, this friend, I got involved to try to help him, and the case had been lost at the VA level and was going to the VA appeal. And took a good bit of time, but there had not been ever any medical evidence put into the record to support this PTSD diagnosis. So I got the records, got medical statements, got affidavits, and built a case where this guy could get the benefits to which he was entitled, and was successful. And of course, I was not a VA qualified lawyer, so I did not receive a fee and didn't want one. I just did this to help a friend, and he was really deserving. He was in the Marines. Took a lot of abuse, but that's just an example of being able to help someone that really couldn't help himself and couldn't get anybody else to help him.
At any point during your career, did you ever consider becoming a judge?
I was thinking about it generally after Earl Hanley retired. And that's when I got a call from you that you wanted to leave Baker Worthington and come to Cleveland to practice. I thought that was a great idea, but the caveat was that you wanted to do it only if I would stay and help you and practice with you, which I did, and been the greatest 25 years that I've had in my practice.
Same here. Shifting gears a little bit, during your practice, have you ever had any significant or meaningful impact insofar as actually changing the law in the state of Tennessee?
Oh, well, I wrote an amendment to the wrongful death statute that got passed. I guess that changed it in some way. I've had some appeals cases that changed it or defined it. I remember a case of Life Care versus Ashley. I represented a young lady who had seemed like it was a wrist or an arm injury. But at any rate, the trial court gave me an award. The Court of Appeals reversed the trial court and applied the 2.5 time cap to a scheduled member. And the Supreme Court took the case and agreed with me that the 2.5 time cap does not apply to a scheduled member injury in workers' comp cases, and I assume that's still a law. This changing this wrongful death statute, I had this case where again, an old client, a lady, got me to represent her when her daughter got killed in an automobile accident case up in McMinn County. And as it turned out, when I got into it, I find out that years before, this daughter had gotten married to basically a transient construction worker, and he was gone, abandoned her. They didn't have any children, fortunately, and had been gone for a number of years when this young lady was killed in an accident. But under the statute, the benefits of the wrongful death proceeds would have gone to the surviving spouse. So the proposed amendment that got put into created a situation of abandonment and a rebuttable presumption if the person had been gone for 2 years without seeing or supporting. And that was useful in my case, and I assume useful in other cases where someone is the same or similar position, where you've got a spouse or an ex-spouse who just abandons a family. Those are just two that come to mind right now. I'm sure there are other cases I had probably changed the law in a bad way.
I've heard you referred to over the years as being a lawyer's lawyer. So what does that mean to you?
Well, I guess that people call me, that referred to me to that because I represented a lot of lawyers in different situations, or lawyers' families, or some judges, families, and I don't know how many, but been a number through the years. And I always thought it was a professional courtesy early on. I'm not going to charge a fellow lawyer. If they had any expenses involved, they could pay it, but I could use my time to help a colleague that needed some legal help. And I first was kind of flattered by it, but later on I figured the only reason they were coming to me is they knew I wasn't going to charge them.
Well, in addition to practicing law, as you described, have you been involved in any other professional employment endeavors, businesses, and things of that nature over your career?
Well, the main thing, I mean, I've been involved in a lot of bad deals. One of my banker friends got me involved in the ownership of a coffee plantation in Chiapas, Mexico, and that was a big money loser. But in 1998, I got together with some other businessmen here in town and professionals, and 1999 we chartered a state bank, Southern Heritage Bank. We had 10 businessmen, plus we had 2 bankers that we brought on board. And that was a very interesting time. It was hard work, but I was a director from then until I retired in 2014 when we sold the bank to First Citizens National Bank of Dyersburg. I was attorney for the bank and served as chairman of the audit committee the entire time, and was served on all the committees in the bank, loan committee, compliance, and everything. But I learned a lot, I enjoyed a lot, and made a lot of good friends during that period of time.
So as an attorney for the bank, and you being on the board of directors, did you have to learn a new area of the law, or were you already schooled in that area of the law?
Well, certainly there were new areas in the compliance issue, and this was, Dodd-Frank came in. It kind of turned the small community banks upside down, because we had to start spending a lot of money on compliance, as much as larger institutions. As far as me being chairman of the audit, I had to learn the ins and outs of that and kind of stay on top of it. From the loan committee standpoint, it's just evaluating the credit worthiness of people. We had certain guidelines to go by, and I knew how to secure debt and obligation through mortgages or pledging of assets, that type of thing, and gave the bank a lot of guidance on that. A legal malpractice case I mentioned over in Memphis stemmed out of that, where a good lawyer, and I hated to make the call to him, and as more than he, and hated to receive it, but he had neglected to file a timely complaint objecting to a discharge, and we had good basis for it. But that case, we had to file it, but it got resolved without trial, which is good. But it was a good experience.
You told us a lot about the rewards that you've received and the successes that you've had over your legal career. Have there been any hardships or pitfalls that you've experienced or had to endure over your legal career?
Well, I think I mentioned to you about my friend and buddy Scotty Scott dying and getting killed. That was a very difficult time. But as far as particular hardships, it's really career has pretty much been a blessing to me. I can't imagine, looking back over these years, I can't imagine ever doing anything else other than the practice of law. And I guess that's why I'm still hanging around here. And, you know, your brother Josh, he's still likes to sit down with me and pick my brain on, you know, what I would do and why, and give him some guidance. And I take joy and pleasure in that too.
Well, I understand, Dad, that there's a thoroughbred racehorse that's named after you. Why don't you tell us that story?
That's another crazy one. I learned that one day when I picked up the Cleveland Daily Banner, and it had a picture of a thoroughbred horse on it, and the caption underneath it, you know, talked about this horse being named Roger Jenne. And I had just finished representing someone involved in the ownership of this thoroughbred horse. So, you know, for some reason they named the horse Roger Jenne, but the funniest part of it, and I guess the beneficial part to me, was shortly after that they had a big banquet recognizing the owner of this horse at the museum. There were probably 250, 300 people there, and the mayor was the MC, and he was, I guess, going to try to poke some fun at me and naming a horse after me. And he asked this owner, said, "Why in the world would you name a horse after Roger Jenne?" And she said, "Well, Roger's a champion. I thought if I named my horse Roger Jenne, it'd be a champion too."
Let's take just a few-minute break before we wrap up. Dad, tell us about your current activities and what you're doing now.
Well, I'm doing a little work on this case. I told you, I mentioned earlier, I just had a Zoom call a couple weeks ago with an expert witness out of North Carolina, and brought him in and introduced him to the facts of this case. And this is the one that I'm working on with an attorney in Chattanooga. And, you know, and before I left to come over here to the courthouse today, Josh asked me if I was coming back to the office. He had something he wanted to run by me. So Josh talks to me about his cases, particularly the ones that have some novel issues in it. So I'm still kind of dabbling around in the practice of law. You know, I play golf. I've got a lot of friends. I play golf here locally. I go to the Y to work out. I pick on my guitar. I like reading. I read some real good books. Just finished a few good ones. And Patty and I have a condo down on the beach. We like to go down there. It's just about a six and a half hour drive. We can get down there and do some R&R and take in the beach time when it's not crowded and when the weather's nice. Still go to, you know, Josh's two boys are in high school, and go to all their football games. And little Sam, I go to his flag football games on Saturday morning. I'm big into Tennessee football, so I watch that as much as I can. And it's amazing how busy you stay doing not a lot of anything.
So you mentioned reading a book. What books have you recently read?
Oh, I've just finished a couple of really good books. One is called The King of Diamonds, and I was not familiar with this. The setting is Dallas, Texas, and it's about this fellow that was doing all these jewelry thefts. Started in about 1950 and ended in 1970, and they were all common to the University Park area where SMU is, and for Highland Park, you know, the big lush part of Dallas. And this guy was, and this is a true story based on true events, and they never did find this guy. The author of this, I think her name is Penderton, and she was an investigative journalist, and she did 7 years of research, interviewed all kinds of people, but the book takes a deep dive into really the dark side of Dallas, you know, with the gambling, prostitution, you know, you name it, the mafia connections. And she did a very thorough job, and in her own investigative way narrowed down the suspects, and there was evidently at that time a lot of political undertone because it looked like a lot of fingers were pointing to this son in a real prominent family. They actually had tracks going from a victim's house back to this other house, but the police never went after him. But this guy would go in, he would know where the jewels were, big diamonds, big money, oil money out there. And he would actually hide in the closets, and they'd go to bed, probably had a little bit too much adult beverage. They'd go to bed and go to sleep, and he'd get them up, pick through their diamonds and whatever he wanted. And he did the thing, like if there's a pair of diamond earrings, he would just take one, just to kind of upset the owners even more. But it's a really interesting book. And the other true story I just finished, I don't know if you know McCracken Poston, a lawyer down in Catoosa County, Georgia.
I do.
McCracken wrote this book called The Zenith Man about a client that he had that was charged with murdering his wife that supposedly no one knew he had for 30 years. And the state's theory is that this guy was keeping his wife captive. And as it turned out, McCracken established and proved that the wife died as a result of an epileptic seizure. And the coincidental thing about it, and I don't know if you remember this or not, but FloJo, the great track star, died in the exact same fashion. She had an epileptic seizure, face down, and actually asphyxiated herself, and that's what McCracken showed in this case. But anyway, I've just finished those two books, really good. I'm reading one right now, a Baldacci book. It's not a true story, but it sounds like one, called The Calamity of Souls. And it's set in Upper Virginia in 1968, where a black man is charged with killing two older white women. And I'm getting into that pretty good, but it takes you back to, what was going on really in the 1960s, even as late as 1968, and really the Jim Crow was still alive and well in a lot of parts of this country. So that's an entertaining book. I read some books on religion. I like Mike Pompeo's book. I think you gave me Never Give an Inch, and Bill Barr's book. I enjoyed that, One Damn Thing After Another. And I kind of switched back and forth by reading some lighter fiction and then something a little deeper like that. But I enjoy reading.
When you conclude this current case that you're working on, do you have plans to take any other cases, or are you just going to play golf, read the guitar, and go to the beach and read books?
Well, I never planned on taking this case, but, I guess I'm maybe soft when a former client or friend says, Lee, I just really need you to help me on this. Can you help me? And I just hate to say no. I've had some other clients recently call and want me to get involved, and I try to just say, let's get someone else to do it. And invariably it circles back around to me. I've said for years I'd probably give up my law license if it wasn't for Josh, but I think I need to have it in case he needs to, someone to help him.
Over the years, you've made an effort to go to the annual Tennessee Bar Foundation meetings and activities over in Nashville. Why has that been important to you, for you to be active with the Tennessee Bar Foundation?
Well, obviously one thing is it's an opportunity for me to see a lot of my friends from around the state, from Memphis to Bristol, that I don't get to see very often. So we get to see these guys and ladies and their wives that we've been friends with, and just have fun and reminisce. And I enjoy getting to meet a lot of the new, young fellows that come into it. So it's just a fun, enjoyable festive occasion. And I think what the Bar Foundation is doing with their grant program is just phenomenal. They have the IOLTA, the Interest on Lawyers Trust Funds, and I thought about this the other day when I first came to Cleveland. and started the practice with these two guys that I practiced with, they didn't even have a trust fund. They didn't have an escrow account. So all the money went into one, and most law firms here in Cleveland were that way. And I immediately, separated that, started a separate escrow account, and then a separate firm account, operational account. But back in those days, the firm that I was with, they commingled. They shouldn't have, but they commingled for a while. But it was primarily in real estate transactions. There was another law firm here who had a lot of plaintiffs' cases and condemnation lawsuits. The way condemnation lawsuits get started is that the state, does their order of taking, and they put the money, into court that they think they should pay. And what was happening is the lawyer's taking that money out and putting it in his account, and where the interest went. It sure didn't go to the client. But this has been back decades ago. But that's why I think that the Bar Foundation, IOLTA, it was needed long before it happened, and I'm happy to support it, and I'm really delighted with what they do with the money.
Along those lines, over the years, have you been involved either with your local bar, other organizations, community activities, things of that nature, politics?
I'd say not heavily. Now, like I say, I came here in 1969, and in 1970, Winfield Dunn ran for governor, and he won. And I was supportive of Winfield Dunn because I liked the person. I didn't know him personally, but I liked the person and what he stood for. And that was really a shakeup. I think for about 50 years, the Democrats had controlled the state up until that time. Later on, I supported Governor McWhorter. He was over Weakley County. He was a friend of Judge Harris's. Later on, I supported Lamar Alexander because T.O. Helton had a baker firm in Chattanooga, and I liked Lamar Alexander and what he stood for. But I've not been deeply involved. I got involved in local politics a little bit a few years back to correct what I perceived to be an injustice where happened to be a black man, but he was an acquaintance of mine, but he'd been the vice president of the mayor for years, been on the city council for 25 years. And the other council members had a little backdoor meeting and got him removed as vice mayor and put one of the council members in that position. It really kind of ticked me off. And I saw this council member at a meeting and told him that I didn't like what happened to him, and if I could help him right or wrong, I'd be glad to do it. And he appreciated that and came to my home not long after that and said he wanted to run as councilman at large, which would be running against the person that did this to him, or I think led the charge against him. Everybody said he couldn't, we couldn't win. We beat this guy 3-1 and righted a wrong, and as soon as that happened, he was designated again as vice mayor, and he just retired recently. I've done a few things like that. I've helped recently, not real recently, but a number of years ago, our city manager retired, and they were going to, I thought, make a political move to get a new city manager, which would not be good for the city. And I went to city council meeting a couple times and suggested that they each councilman appoint one person from their district to represent them in a search committee. And we hired Larry Wallace. They did that. They agreed with my recommendation. We hired Larry Wallace as kind of a spearhead. Larry's deceased now, but he's former head of the TBI. And we conducted a really good, thorough search. We created a subjective matrix where there's no politics involved, and we were able to come up with 5 good recommendations to the council, and they hired one of them, and he's still city manager and doing a good job today. Just small things like that. I was a prosecutor for the city of Cleveland way back, and the only reason they hired me as a city prosecutor as a young lawyer, I went into city court one time and they had charged my client with DUI, but the police officers didn't know how to put on any evidence to establishment. All they kept putting in evidence was he was drunk. They didn't put any objective evidence that he was staggering, his speech was slurred, he smelled of alcohol. He said, well, he was drunk, Judge. And the judge agreed with me and dismissed the case. And the chief of police at that time was Bernard Snyder, and he got upset. He came to me, and he was, really giving me down the road. And I said, wait a minute, look. And I explained to him, what the problem was, that these officers needed help. They needed training. They needed someone to help them learn how to present a case, whether it's public drunkenness, DUI, instead of talking about conclusions. And he went to city council, and they offered me the job as the first city prosecutor in Cleveland, and I held that for a number of years, and I just got so busy in other things, I passed it on.
So, Dad, what projects do you have that have yet to be accomplished, if any?
Yeah, well, the main thing, and I've been working on this, I'm not real good at keyboarding, and here lately my fingers are even getting stiffer. So I have it on my computer where I can dictate, and it's like that old dragon naturally speaking thing. But I'm trying to put together, not a memoir for me, but I'm trying to put together a family history for you and the grandchildren and all those that come later on in the Jenne line about, a few things like I've told you that I know about my mother and my father and my grandparents, and even, going way back to the heritage. The Jenne name is not a common name, and in, 1740, the Mayflower landed in Plymouth. In 1743, the little James landed in Plymouth, and there was a guy on it named John Jenne, spelled Jenney, and he was the original Jenne in America, and all the Jenne line flows down from him. And I've got a few books on that as well, but I'm trying to, one of my big projects, before I check out, if I can get down on paper something for you children and grandchildren and all the little Jennies to follow, to go back to and learn more about where they came from and the importance of the ancestry and family and history, is what I'd like to do. And I've got a lot of pictures, from my mother, pictures that I've taken. And when I went up to see Riley a few years ago, we went through Vermont and visited a Jenne farm there that's been in the same family since 1760. In Plymouth, Massachusetts, there's a Jenne museum and a Jenne grist mill. Things that, I may have told you, I don't know, but things that certainly my grandchildren don't know and great-grandchildren won't know unless I can get something down on paper before I check out.
Well, Dad, is there anything else that you wish that I had asked and didn't, or do you like to tell us?
I think you've covered it all. I think I mentioned, this, I can't imagine ever having done anything in my life other than practicing law. I love football. I love coaching. I coached you when you were, a little kid, coached basketball, football. I still like that. I'm still, my grandson Connor's a quarterback, a real good quarterback at Silverdale, and I'm trying to draw up plays for him. But just a, frustrated old football player, I guess. But I'm pretty content right now with life and where I am, and if I can get a few things more accomplished, I'd be happy.
Well, Dad, the final question is, you've told us a lot about your career and your practice of law, not only here in Bradley County and the 10th Judicial District, but across the state. And you have a lot of lawyers across the state, and especially here in the 10th Judicial District, that look up to you and respect you, all that you've accomplished, and some of which you described. And you also serve as a mentor to some of the younger lawyers. So with that said, my question is, how does that make you feel at this stage of your career?
I guess just really humble.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed our time together, and this concludes our interview.
Thank you.